Okay, and I think we're live. Hi everyone and welcome back to my channel. For those new here, my name's Nikki. I'm an author and editor and I post videos here on YouTube about writing, editing, reading and all the other things I love, and it's the latter we're here for today because it's the end of the month, literally the last day of the month for a change. I'm not a bit early or a bit late, and I'm going to do a quick wrap up of everything I've been watching film and TV wise during the last 4 weeks or so. I'm testing out some new tech today. You might notice a slight change in the appearance of my video. I've just got a new webcam plug-in rather than using the built-in one in the PC. And I've also bought a new microphone, plug-in microphone. So this is their first trial run. It certainly looks like there's a clearer picture, although now I'm regretting swapping over today because everyone can see my bad hair day even more with the better quality camera, but never mind. Hopefully they're all going to work okay and I'm not going to have to refilm this in 2 minutes, but we'll find out. It all looked okay on my sort of tech check before I started, so fingers crossed. So, yes, film and TV that I've been watching during June. I've actually got quite a number of things to go through this month, more than usual. And that's because I've been watching a couple of series fewer and a couple of extra movies lately. So let's start off with DVD. JB Hi-Fi here in Australia had a sale on back in early June, and they were offering, I think it was 25 or 30% off, which is a bit more than they usually do. Usually they get to 20% and then refuse to go any higher. So while they did have such a good deal on, I went and I bought a couple of DVDs. I'd only intended to get one, but I saw another one there that looked good, and while they had such a great offer, I decided to grab it. So they're both Korean movies, and the one I went in there for particularly was Minari. So I'll talk about that one first. So Minari has had a bit of attention lately because of the Oscars, and it's a quiet sort of drama about a Korean family, the parents and the children who have moved out from California, where they were working in a kind of factory-ish, farming factory-ish setting where they check the sex of chickens, young like little chicks, which I didn't even know was a job until I saw this this film. So that is actually a job, checking chickens' bottoms, and they've moved out further into the country, more into the sort of Midwest, I guess, and they want to set up their own little farm. And the husband's got all these great plans. He's bought this piece of land he reckons is an absolute bargain. But they're living in this like sort of pre-built, sort of dumped down house. The wife's not impressed when they first arrive. And they encounter various problems along the way. And then the mother, the wife's mother, comes to live with them too. It was a really interesting piece. I thought the acting was brilliant. I liked the premise. It was a little bit slow moving here and there, but there was plenty of drama as you got towards the end in particular. And the ending itself, I don't want to spoiler it, but to me, it kind of left it open for your own interpretation of whether things were going to work out for them or not. So if you like thoughtful dramas, then this is definitely one to check out. The second one I bought that I got just on a whim because I saw it on the shelf next to Minari was Memories of Murder, which had been in our cinemas recently. It's an old film, but I don't know about you guys, but here, because of COVID and there's not been as many new releases, our cinemas have taken to showing old movies, often as double bills, unlike, this really old stuff from like the 70s and the 60s, maybe not the 60s, well, a couple from the 60s, mostly sort of the 70s, 80s, 90s, I would say. And they've been doing all these reruns. And this is an older movie that they did show. And I ammed and ahed at the time about whether to go and see it and ended up not going. So I thought, well, this DVD with the discount was less than a cinema ticket, so I might as well buy it. So it's a story that's based loosely, I believe, on a real life crime investigation, what's purported to be South Korea's first serial killer. And we follow the police as they pretty inept, to be honest. We were sitting there, my husband and I, watching this thing, and we were just going, what are you doing? Like, you're trampling the evidence. What are you doing? You're making up the evidence now. It's like, it was all happening. And this is another movie a bit like Minari, where the end's a little bit open. And Minari, that didn't worry me. This one, I'd got to the end of this investigation. I kind of wanted them to catch the bad guy and for everything to be resolved, you know. And it wasn't quite resolved in the way I'd kind of anticipated it at the end, which I guess if it's based on a true life story, maybe they never did resolve it. So it's worth watching, though. It's kind of got a sort of black humor-ish edge, although it's mostly a sort of serial killer drama. So if either of those things appeal to you, do check it out. Moving on to Netflix. So everything else I'm going to talk about now, I watched on Netflix this month. The Studio Ghibli films went up on Netflix a while back, and I've been saying for ages I was going to rewatch them because I haven't seen them for years. You know, I was probably a teenager, so when I watched them, and having now started to study Japanese, I kind of wanted to look at them with a fresh adult perspective and with a sort of language learning perspective as well. So far I've watched Spirited Away, Howl's Moving Castle, and My Neighbour Totoro. So Spirited Away and Howl's Moving Castle, I had watched before, both of those. I still find, I know Spirited Away is the one that gets the most attention generally, but I actually like Howl's Moving Castle more. I think just personally for me, I like Howl as a character. And I like that kind of romance between him and Sophie more than the vague romance that takes place in Spirited Away. Although Spirited Away is still an excellent movie. So just in case anyone hasn't seen them, I'm kind of just talking about them, assuming everyone knows them. So Spirited Away is an animated feature film about a young girl who, her and her parents are moving to a new place. And on the way, they explore this tunnel, which takes them to this sort of strange world. And the parents sit down, they see all this food in front of them, start eating and turn into pigs. The girl hasn't eaten and she runs away. And she soon finds herself helped by a young boy. And then she becomes a worker, if you like, in this strange world. And that's the only way to avoid a similar fate to her parents. And all the time she's there, she's trying to find a way to escape and to rescue her parents and get them all home. So that's the basic premise. There's witches, there's magic, all sorts of things going on. And I mean, No Face is my favorite character. He's this sort of weird spirit creature that befriends her. And I don't want to say too much more than that in case you haven't watched it. If you have watched it, you'll know what I'm talking about. Anyway, if you haven't, I don't want to spoil it. But it's an enjoyable fantasy film. My husband sat and watched this a bit with me, and he didn't really get into it. It wasn't his sort of thing. But if you like that kind of animated fantasy, then do check it out. Howl's Moving Castle is a similar idea in some ways. In this one, we have a young girl who's cursed by a witch, and she becomes really old. She looks like a grandma, even though she's only a young woman. And she ends up joining Howl as his cleaning lady in his moving castle, which is kind of like a sort of animatronic thing, but it's powered by a fire demon with whom Howl has this strange contract that's going on. And basic premise of the story in this one is about breaking this contract, which is causing Howl problems. And plus, of course, getting herself back to her normal appearance. This one, there's just something about this one that appeals to me a little bit more than Spirited Away, just on a personal level. But both of them are equally enjoyable movies, whether you're an adult or a child. And the final Studio Ghibli one, My Neighbour Totoro. So this is one I hadn't seen before, and I kind of recognized the Totoro like character, having seen it around a bit online. But I thought this was a really sweet, enjoyable film. It's in some ways a little bit more simplistic perhaps than the other two, and although it's fantasy, it's not as epic fantasy, if you like, as Spirited Away and Howl's Moving Castle. It's a bit more of a quiet suburban, if you like, fantasy, but it's really adorable. It moves along at a great pace, and it's definitely worth watching. Another piece that probably falls into a similar adorable category is A Whisker Away, which is the next one I watched, and this is a newer piece. And the premise of this one is there's a young girl who has a crush on this boy, and he's kind of ignoring her. And one day she manages to get hold of this magical mask. She meets this strange figure and just randomly accepts this thing off him, and it turns her into a cat. And whenever she's a cat, she can go and be with this boy, and he really loves her as a cat. So she spends a lot of time with him in cat form. However, it gets to the point where she's potentially not going to be able to turn back into a human anymore. So that's the kind of thrust of the story, that they have to find a way for her to return to her normal form. And so this is, in some ways, a slightly deeper piece in that you're dealing with issues of sort of bullying and social exclusion, and just dealing with like mental health problems. And she tries to deal with them initially by running away from them as a cat. And of course, that doesn't work. So it's got a sort of deeper message, which is why I think, again, it would appeal to both adults and children. But it's also great fun. I liked the animation. I thought it looked wonderful. So it's definitely one to have a look at. And let's see, the final film animation I watched was Your Name, so Kimi no Nawa. So this is a slightly older one, but it's very well known. And I hadn't gotten around to watching it. And in fact, I'm watching videos on YouTube at the moment, studying Japanese with Japanese Ammo with Misa. I really adore her channel, and she's a huge fan of this film, and she's mentioned it a number of times. So I thought I really must get around to watching it. And this one's a sort of maybe slightly older. It's got they're school age, high school age people for most of it. And it starts off with that they suddenly randomly, this boy and girl, wake up in each other's bodies. And the girl lives way out in the country, the boy's in Tokyo. And so they have these one days in each other's body here and there. But they don't really remember a lot about it, or each other when they wake up. And it's kind of a quest film in some ways, that they're trying to find their way to each other, especially when a natural disaster happens and they realize that there's a sort of time issue going on, and that they're different years apart, and there's a chance they could prevent this disaster from happening in one of their switches. I don't want to say too much more than that, because that will spoiler it. But this was a really adorable film. It's definitely one I could see myself rewatching and getting something different out of each time. So I do recommend that one. Moving on. So I've got two more films, if you like. One's a kind of theatrical film. But first off, I watched a Korean film, a Netflix original called Sweet and Sour. And this is a rom-com, but it's kind of a rom-com with a twist. And at first it started off and it did seem like a pretty standard rom-com. There's this guy, and he's a slightly bigger, chubbier guy, and he ends up in hospital, ill, falls in love with the nurse, and eventually they start a bit of a relationship. However, it seems like suddenly he's lost weight and he's really cool and hot. And because he's told her that that's what he would do. We see him say, yes, I'm going to start running. I'm going to get really buff. And in the next scene, he is. So we're like, oh, okay. And we continue on with the drama. And I can't actually tell you the best bit about this film, because that would be like the most enormous spoiler in the history of spoilers. But let's just say I was sort of humming along thinking, oh, yeah, it's a standard rom-com. It's okay. Nothing special. And then suddenly this massive twist came out of nowhere. And right at the end, and it was so clever that it really raised the film in my estimations. It kind of made this movie that otherwise would just have been a standard rom-com. So if that sounds interesting to you, definitely check it out. And the final sort of one-off piece I watched is a Japanese theatre show, live action theatre show that was filmed. An epic 3.5-hour production that I sat through. It's called Seven Souls in Skull Castle. And actually, I was doing stuff while watching this. I should start with that kind of disclaimer. So I was kind of looking up and looking down. And I kind of feel I did miss something somewhere along the way. I mean, the basic premise is it's kind of set towards the end of the feudal period in Japan. And there are these different factions all out for their own thing. There's historical real-life characters mentioned, but there's a definite fantasy element running through the story as well. And so there's lots of combat. There's a bit of sort of dark magic and stuff going on. And it's just very long. I think that was the issue. I kind of like drifted in and out of focus because it just went on for so long. And overall, I would say I enjoyed it. However, this was one production, and on Netflix, there were various other productions as well. And I am thinking of watching one of the other productions, both as a comparison and just to watch it a bit more with a bit more dedication. I was going to say a bit more dedicatedly, but I'm not even sure if I can say it, if that's a proper word, but with a bit more dedication, just to see what I get out of it a second time. Because it was only at the end I kind of realized that there were all these historical figures involved as well. And I was like, oh, I must have missed something earlier on. So I am going to give another one a go. A couple of them are marginally shorter at 3 hours. So I might pick one of those slightly shorter ones and give it another try. But if you're interested in Japanese theatre, definitely take a look. There's several productions of it on there. And that brings me on to series. So I watched 6 series during June. So I did watch quite a lot this month, really. First of all, I'll talk about Series 5 of Lucifer. Now, to be honest, Seasons 1 and 2 of Lucifer were awesome, really awesome. 3 was getting a bit for me. 4 I liked a little bit more. But to be honest, I got to 5, and as much as I love the character, I was kind of a bit over it, to be honest. I mean, I sat through all the episodes, but I was constantly comparing it to Korean dramas and going, you know, Korean drama would do this so much better. And I think it's just had its day, to be honest. I think it had its peak, and maybe it should have ended before Netflix picked it up. Although at the time I was like, oh, great, Netflix have picked it up. I kind of feel like its peak really was those first 2 seasons. And no matter what the cast are doing, I think I'm just getting sick of the story. It's just was starting to get a bit stupid. So yeah, it's a bit of a mixed bag for me. Look, if you're a huge Lucifer fan, then you'll be pleased there's a new season. But I'm kind of over it a bit now. I think it's had enough. A better season, second season though, was Ragnarok. This is a gonna get it the right way around. Norwegian. It's Norwegian or Swedish. Norwegian, I'm pretty sure. It's a Norwegian. I'm gonna go with that. Series. It's set in the modern day, but it's kind of like the gods are still around and some of their powers have been transferred to these new people. And we met in the first series the guy who had taken on the powers of Thor. And we pick up the story essentially where we left off in season 2. He's just defeated the leader of the giants who was polluting the town and doing all this terrible stuff. However, there's still trouble brewing with the other giants. And also with his brother, who we've suddenly found out is actually the biological son of the guy who got killed in the first series. And so he's actually part giant himself. Obviously, he is essentially the Loki character. And I really enjoyed the way that story took that twist. It definitely picked up well from the second series and carried on quite strongly. And the end of this series really left me keen to see what would happen next. So if you're looking for a sort of fantasy series that's a little bit underplayed, it's a fairly sort of low-key fantasy, a low-key fantasy, then definitely check this one out because it's worth watching. You have to give it a few episodes that first season to get into it, but then it really takes off. And season 2 was an excellent continuation. So moving on, I'm just having a look. Yes, so they're all Korean dramas for the remainder to finish us off. So first off, Descendants of the Sun. Now, this was a mixed bag for me. I watched this one because I'd heard it was leaving Netflix, although Netflix haven't given... I just got that from another website, and Netflix itself wasn't telling me that, so it could just be a complete lie. But it was such a big name one that I decided to watch it, even though it's not my usual drama. And I think the fact it's not my usual drama was the issue here. It wasn't bad. The acting was good. It had some moments that I really enjoyed. But overall, I just wasn't that invested in it. And I think it's because it was just all rom-com. And essentially, I mean, there was the drama of what was happening in the war and at the hospital and various things. But I kind of like it when the rom-coms I've watched have generally had another plot point as well. For example, like Jekyll, Hyde and Me is about their romance, but it's also about him trying to keep his split personality a secret from the chairman and, like, you know, the board members and various things. So for me, this one, it was just a bit too dull. And that sounds horrible, and that's probably a slightly over the top word for it, because it wasn't absolutely boring. I wasn't sitting there going, when's this ever going to end? I did sort of watch through it, and there were good times in between, like the boring bits, but I think for me it just wasn't my style of drama, I think is the fair way to put it. Plus there was all this medical stuff and all the war stuff going on with guns and various bits, and they kept making so many errors, and even I was spotting them, spotting issues with stuff that they couldn't really do with combat, or that wouldn't work that way, and stuff with medicine that wouldn't work that way. And my husband, although he wasn't watching with me, he was sitting next to me for some of the episodes working on his laptop, and he picked out even more than I did. He's a medical scientist, and he was like, that's just not realistic. And some of it, even I knew, like, just as a layperson, wasn't right. And so that kind of like put a dampener on things as well. But yeah, look, if you like rom-com with lots of emotion, then do check it out. Going back to something a bit more light-hearted rom-com, and again, a rom-com of the sort I mentioned with a bit of a like plot twisty kind of thing as well. I watched The Secret Life of My Secretary. So in this one, the main guy has been involved in an accident, and he's lost the ability to see faces, and he accidentally mistakes his secretary for this heiress that he's supposed to be meeting and potentially dating and marrying. So there's plenty of like humor and mistaken identities and various things along the way. So overall, I like this one. It's not one of my absolute favorites, but it was really enjoyable. It was quirky, and I had some really fun moments. So if that sounds like your sort of thing, check it out. Two left. So first up is Memories of Alhambra. So this one was interesting. I started this one not knowing entirely what to expect. It's essentially a story about playing an AI game that seeps out into reality. I think that's probably the fairest way to put it. The people that play this game suddenly discover that if you kill someone in the game, they can actually end up dead. And then they turn into this like non-player character who stalks you, essentially, tries to kill you forevermore. So that is the basic premise of what's going on. I won't say too much more than that because of spoilers, but there's obviously a romance element at the same time. And this was good. I thought it had a nice blend of this sort of that sci-fi fantasy element. There was plenty of drama. There were lots of, fighting scenes and lots of sort of edge of your seat. Is he going to make it out of there kind of moments? There was one thing that happened that I thought was a huge plot hole. And I sat there through most of the series going, are they ever going to explain this? And they kind of did. But right at the end, like I'm talking the last 10 minutes of the show, they suddenly came up with this explanation, which solved that plus a query of what had happened to the main guy kind of thing. I kind of felt that was a little bit of a cop-out in some ways. They were just kind of writing themselves out of a plot hole. But I was willing to accept it because I'd had such fun with the series that I was like, okay, I'll just accept whatever they tell me and we'll go with it. So that was that one. But it's worth checking out if you want something just really different and out there with a bit of a sort of sci-fi fantasy twist. And so last up, I watched Mr. Sunshine. So this is an historical drama. I've seen things online that have said it's not entirely historically accurate. And I think from what I've read, most of that is that they've advanced the historical events, kind of condensed them into a much smaller time period than they actually happened in. But you don't necessarily watch historical drama as fiction drama expecting it to be 100% historically accurate. So this is kind of very late Joseon era. So sort of end of the 19th century into the early 20th century, right at the end of that period. So we have a sort of mix of Western suits with hanbok going on and Western ideas. There's a tram that's been installed in Hansong, which is modern day Seoul. And we have, interestingly, a kind of three-way love triangle, or well, four ways, I suppose, if you count the girl as one of the ways. So we have Aishin, who's the daughter of a noble family. And then she has three suitors. So we have Eugene Choi, who is the soldier he was born in Korea, but he escaped to America at a young age, grew up there, and has become a soldier in the American army. Then we have Kim Hui-sung, who is the son of a noble family who has been engaged for many years to Aishin, but who has been off in Japan studying and has just come back. And we have Gudong Mei. Gudong Mei is a Korean who also left Korea at a young age. However, instead of going to America like Eugene, he went to Japan. And he's essentially become a member of like an early era Yakuza. And he is in charge of kind of the Japanese sector of the city. And they're all, for various reasons and in various ways, pursuing Aishin. The background of this, of course, is the Japanese, I was going to say infiltration, but that sounds a bit underhand. I guess it's the just the steady Japanese influence seeping into Chosun, and the fact that Japanese are trying to take over the country essentially as a kind of vassal state, if you like. And you have the characters who are promoting this and the characters who are trying to prevent it. I don't want to say too much more than that because I don't want to start bringing spoilers in. But obviously there's warfare going on, there's political intrigue going on, and there's the personal dramas in all these characters' lives as well. Overall, I really enjoyed it. The first couple of episodes, it took me just that couple of episodes to get into it and to get used to who all the characters are. So it's quite a few of them and what was going on. But once I did get caught up with everything in my mind, I got really involved in it and really enjoyed it. I should do a quick warning without spoilers that it's not the happiest piece. You're not going to see that happy ending where everyone gets to ride off into the sunset. So you need to be prepared for a little bit of heartbreak towards the end. But it's definitely really worth watching. It's one I'm actually considering trying to get on DVD. I liked it that much. So that's probably a good place to end for the month. It's been a little bit longer than usual as I had all those extra films. I'm going to end there and check this all recorded. Okay, fingers crossed. And then hopefully come back and do my books wrap up as well for the month. So do join me again in 10-15 minutes when I'll be back to do that. I'll close there for now, but I hope to see you all again shortly. Bye, everyone.